Cool. Welcome to Virtual DDD. This is our meetup for September 2025. And today we have Anne-Marie Charrett talking to us about system thinking for sustainable quality. So if you're joining us online today on YouTube, also know that we're on meet.com if you want to interact more actively. And other than that, I wanted to let you know that there is some interesting events happening in September. It's already on our website, and that will be the Andrew Harmon Law is joining us on the 23rd of September for Virtual DDD, talking about anarchy and everything that you want to know about it. But if you want to know more about it, please have a look on our website. And now we're going to start this presentation by Anne-Marie. Can you please introduce yourself? And that way we can kick it off.
Fantastic. Hi. Yes, Anne-Marie Charrett here. I guess just so you know, please feel free to ask questions anytime or put them in the chat. Andrea, you'll ping me if there's a question because I'm not necessarily always watching the chat. I'm busy doing my presenteering. But listen, just really happy to be here. I do have a question that I wanted to kick off with, which is what when you think about quality, what do you think about why is quality so hard to get right? I think this is one of the kind of lifelong questions that it's hard. I mean, it seems like it's easy. I mean, testing, people are always telling me that testing is easy, right? But why is it so difficult? To some degree, it's really hard to see. I liken quality to a black hole, right? It's like you don't know there. The only way you know a black hole exists is because of the peripheral things on the outside. And I love the fact someone's just put hard. Testing is hard. Yes, I agree. But a lot of people keep telling me that the testing problem has been solved. So I guess not everybody has that opinion. But yeah, I think it's sort of like a black hole. It's really hard to measure. Somebody's put there, you know, it's hard to see exactly what good quality is like. It's kind of like a nirvana. Now we sort of kind of can see when it's not there, right? If something doesn't work properly, if there's poor usability, it's kind of, then we kind of go, well, that's really bad quality, right? But knowing up front what good quality is going to look like is really, really difficult. And so today what I wanted to do is really sort of have a conversation around quality and what are the things, why is it hard, what can we do about it, and how can we think about quality maybe in a slightly different way. All right, I've just realized that I can totally not see any of my my comments here. Oh, I can. I've just seen them. Fantastic. And I found my control. So I am back on form here. All right, just a little bit about me before we jump all into this. My name, as I said, Anne-Marie Charrett. I like to say that software testing chose me when I left university with a degree in electronic engineering and started working for the European Telco Standards Commission. So testing layer 3, layer 4 protocols. And I was writing test automation for these protocols for devices that will come into the lab to make sure that they complied to the telco European standards. And these were really stringent requirements, really stringent protocols down to bits and bytes about exactly what you know, the protocol should, how the devices should comply. And so we would test these devices and they would comply and they would actually work, you know, where they ticked all the boxes, they were compliant. But when we actually put those devices together, sometimes they just didn't speak to each other. And it was like really this light bulb moment went in my head. And it was like, why is it? Why is it that things that actually fit requirements but are not fit for purpose? They comply, but they don't work. And I think then since then, like that has basically created this kind of curiosity inside me to understand what exactly is good quality, and how do we know that something is there? I currently work at Telstra, which is a large telco in Australia. I feel like I've come back full circle to my telco days. I haven't been working in telco all the time, but I'm currently there, and I call myself a little bit tongue-in-cheek an engineering futurist. This is what happens when they give you full reign to create your own title. I like this title because it says absolutely, sounds really important, but it actually says nothing about what I really do, which is kind of how I like it. I feel compelled to put in also that I am a human. I'll leave you to imagine why. And in the past, I have called myself chief agitator. Now, the reason why I called myself chief agitator was because my boss called me at a different company, called me chief agitator. And I thought this was kind of cool. It was like, so I wore it with a badge of honor. I stuck it on my LinkedIn profile until I kind of had the realization that maybe it wasn't given as a compliment. Maybe, yeah, but I still wear it as a badge of pride. I like to ask the difficult question. I'm also author to the Quality Coaches Handbook, which is kind of like having a quality engineer in your back pocket. And it looks at all the different structures and how we can work in a holistic way to build quality in. And if you get through this talk, there is a little sweetener at the end of a discount for the book. All right, now there's the astute among you might be going, well, hang on a second. I thought you were going to talk about enshittification and avoiding the enshittification trap. Well, yes and no. Like, listen, I as I started writing this talk, I came to the conclusion that I couldn't possibly solve the enshittification problem on my own. I think that's a slightly bit of a grandiose attempt there, but I do think there are ways that we can sort of start avoiding that. It takes all of us as users to make a concerted effort. But enshittification, just in case you're not familiar with the term, is a term created by Cory Doctorow, and it sort of describes those platforms. You know, I think TikTok here is the example, but Twitter, any of these two-sided platforms where you've got a user and a subscriber, and typically the user is offered this really amazing deal. Maybe it's free, a free service where they can get to find like-minded people like themselves, and they can create small communities, and they can really start connecting with each other, and they have this sense of belonging on these platforms that makes them feel sort of like connected, I guess. But on the other side of this platform, there is the suppliers, and the suppliers, the platform is designed to have suppliers as well, and the suppliers are attracted to this because it's a captivated audience, so to speak, for their products. But the platform offers these suppliers really good deals, and these deals, to be able to market to the users for a small amount of money. And so the suppliers start locking themselves into the platform as well. And so you've got this situation where you've got users and suppliers both kind of captivated in for different reasons, but captivated onto the platform. And gradually the pricing for the suppliers goes up and up and up. But unfortunately, they've kind of created their marketing strategy around these platforms. And so it's really hard for them to kind of get out of this, right? They have to make a concerted effort to not use a platform, and there's a lot of fear around that, right? If we drop our marketing strategy and we lose sales, this is going to be a big problem. And so really the only people laughing all the way to the bank are the shareholders who are making big fat tidy profits. So what has this got to do with quality? Well, I hope you kind of can get there. It really, Cory Doctorow calls it decreasing quality over time, right? You come in, you think you've got high value, and gradually the value starts decreasing right before your eyes. Like, what has this got to do with us? I think, like, on a personal level, I'm not really excited about being a product. I value my privacy and my data. But there's people there who want to build these sorts of products, and I guess they see that as valuable. That's for them to make those decisions. But I think what I wanted us to maybe have a think about is, when you think about quality, and you think about, is this automatically what you think about when you hear the word quality? Like, and what exactly is quality? And so that's where I want to start. There's a lot of different definitions of what is quality. There's just so many. Just go Wikipedia. I think there's about 17 different definitions of quality. The two key ones that I hear around a lot is, and I've mentioned them already. One is the fit for purpose, right? So that it's sort of that sort of idea that quality is, it solves it's there to solve a problem. That is quality, and so does it sort of do the thing that you want it to do? Does it solve people's problems? The other end of the spectrum, there's more about sort of quality is meeting the requirements. And you already, if you were here at the start of the talk, you heard about that kind of that conflict that I had in my early days of doing testing, about how difficult it is to get sort of that combination of, yes, it meets all those requirements, and yet it's just not working. It's just not solving the problem. So I think there's a lot in that, at a personal level, sort of meeting requirements. I have real concerns about sort of requirements are often, in my experience, not very well written, and also that they keep changing. Like they keep changing, they keep becoming out of date, and often we don't necessarily have full information. And there's plenty of times where I've sort of working with test engineers who are actually testing the wrong thing because communication hasn't happened between the change in stories and requirements and what they're actually testing. And so they're raising bugs about stuff that is actually working properly. And anyway, it gets to be a bit of a nightmare. So look, for me personally, I have one definition that I call is the definition to kind of rule them all. And it is value. This is Jerry Weinberg's definition. Quality is value to some person. Now, I think I like this definition because it kind of covers all the other definitions by default. So that's kind of handy. But also that I like the subjective nature of this. Now, I guess a lot of people hate this definition for exactly the same reason, because when you've got such a subjective nature definition of quality, it's like, well, how do we test for that? That's just impossible. And, it is true. It is true. When you think about sort of all the things, how subjective quality might be, think about all the different demographics that you're trying to deal with. We talked about stakeholder already. We've talked about stakeholder, value versus customer experience for the users and different types of users. And then even within those users, there's different demographics. And like suddenly this is spiraling out of control. And so how do you actually put a handle on all of that? Now, people have tried with this definition. Michael Bolton added quality is value to some person who matters. And I think that's a smart addition, because in that sort of addition of who matters is you're basically saying we've got to prioritize, right? We can't possibly be testing for all the things. We can be informed and we can have awareness about sort of these different demographics, but ultimately at some point we have to make some decisions about who we're going to prioritize in this big picture. And making sure that we understand that customer base and making informed decisions. And you're going to hear that word informed decisions quite a bit, because I think this is kind of critical to how we think about quality and how we move forward in some of these conversations. Just because it's complex doesn't mean that we simplify it to ignorance, to kind of a really useless level, but we can make informed decisions about sort of when we have the information that we need. All right, so where am I going? Yes, on to Kent Beck. So, and this is kind of touching on the stakeholder value aspect, right? And like it or not, we are absolutely there to make people money in our organizations, and the stakeholders have a say because most often than not, they pay our wages. And it's really interesting working for companies that have where VCs have a large stake in a company as well, because you're basically working for a VC. And so really what they value and what they think about are super important. And so when I work in any organization, I make it a really part of my goal is to understand what is driving the organization and what is it that they value. So Kent Beck's 3X model looks at really it could be a product or it could be a feature if you want, but it looks at sort of the life cycle of any feature or any product. And on the x-axis is basically how much, the profit, how much money they're going to make. The x-axis, sorry, the y-axis is the payoff, although the x-axis is the number of subscribers. They measure success by the number of subscribers. And as you can imagine, in the early days, we're looking at sort of the explore phase where we're trying to figure out what exactly are we going to be building here? What is the right thing? And so, people are ideally doing lots of experiments, hopefully cheap experiments, to really sort of test the market to find out what is their nirvana, what is the secret sauce that we can find and discover, and then we can basically go into the expand phase and just go nuts, as it says here, right? And so in the expand phase, imagine you get to that point where you actually do figure out the secret sauce, and you basically have to scale rapidly. And so when you're scaling rapidly, you're doing things like hiring hundreds of, we had to hire at least 4 developers a month when I was working for an organization in this phase, but it kind of gets like crazy. You've got to deal with all the tech debt that you had when you did Explore because you were doing cheap experiments. You didn't really think about sort of longevity because, yeah, of course, it makes sense not to think about that. You don't even know if that product is actually going to be the end product that you turn out to be. So, you're paying back for a lot of those decisions that you made early on in Explore. You're thinking about hiring, you're thinking about your systems no longer scale, nothing scales basically, and you're, to use the euphemism, you've got to build and fly the plane at the same time. And of course, things sort of start to go a bit shaky and creaky. And it's an exciting time to be with a company, but it's also can be really super stressful, in my personal opinion. And finally, if they get through this, they'll get into that extract phase where they're pretty much saturated the market. And when the market is saturated, they're looking for economies of scale to kind of really continue that payoff. And so, they're looking for efficiencies, cost cutting. Everybody's talking about AI is going to kind of increase efficiencies and productivities, and that's really becomes obsession of that discussion. I think is driven largely by a lot of companies in the extract phase. So, like, you see a lot of enterprises in that space. So when you look at sort of customer value, it's like that is the S curve along there. That is the thing that that stakeholders are looking for. And I think it's worthwhile understanding this because, like I said, if we go back to that definition that quality is valued to some person, like knowing that you need to think differently about customer value at different points in a product or feature life cycle. And consequently, if you believe quality is value to some person, that this is like by definition, that S curve is quality as well. And that we should be thinking differently about quality in depending on the different parts of where we are in that life cycle. So I think that's just something to kind of, be aware of when you're having that discussion about quality, and it's exactly what are your stakeholders looking out for. But like moving, just kind of getting a bit deeper into this, there's also like obviously the people who create software, right? There's us, the software engineers or the product engineers who are building these products. And I think internally there's often this implicit assumption that we know what quality is, which is why I keep harping on about sort of how do we know what quality is, because I think it's an assumption that people make within organizations. But I think, are we really on the same page when it comes to this? Because if you think about people, predominantly product managers or product owners or people who work in the discovery space, when they think about quality and you talk to them, they're really focused on building the right product, right? So they're the people in that explore phase, that purple explore, where they're doing lots and lots of experiments to try and understand what that nirvana is. So that is quality for them. And so they're looking at that and thinking, yeah, that's of course, everyone's responsible for quality, but they mean building the right product. Yet when we move into delivery, we're thinking about building the product right. Yeah, like, is it going to do what we say it's going to do? And so we're very much focused when we talk about quality in software engineering, and delivery teams, we're focused on making sure that there's no bugs in the software, it can scale, and those sorts of typical things that people in software engineering associate quality with. And then finally, there's, the service operations. And I think sometimes we kind of overlook this. We do think about SRE quite a bit, and I think monitoring and alerting and things like that are becoming more and more of value, and people are sort of seeing the value in those spaces. But poor old customer success and customer support still doesn't get the love. And I think this is a huge thing about sort of, that quality for them is being able to support their customers really well. And it's been able to sort of keep our systems up and alive and keeping them well maintained. And, when we think about quality, we need to be thinking about all these three different things. Thinking critically about sort of what is the consequences of these facts? Like, how do we know if we're building the right product is something we could be asking ourselves. How do we know that the product is being built right? How do we know we're supporting the product well? And what does that look like? Or what does that even mean? And how important is it to us? How do we prioritize that in all the things that we have to prioritize and all the things that we have to do? So I think there's value in sort of having that. And sometimes I talk about doing social contracts, so that you actually make a concerted effort to have a discussion on this and then create a social contract around what you're going to do about quality and how you're going to treat it within your team or within your organization. Right. Well, that's a lot of talking about quality, big picture and black holes and whatnot. I want to take a moment to kind of think about how we might deconstruct it. Because let's face it, like I said, it's really hard when things are so vague and so difficult to measure. So I'm not the first person to do this. This is very, very typical about deconstructing quality, is that people have broken it down into different attributes. And you're probably familiar with things like, security, usability, functionality, accessibility. These are all different quality attributes. And so typically people have used these to be able to break down that big lump of quality and to start measuring things in a small, containable, measurable way. And they've used these as proxies for quality. So that's all good. And we still continue to do that today. But I want us to take a think about sort of this graph. Now, this map is the map I wish I had invented, drawn, whatever. it's by, I'll see if I can find the link and put it into the chat later, but it's by some folks in Switzerland. They put this map together, which is sort of quality attributes of a different nature. And I love this map because it shows quality as an ecosystem. Where quality is not sort of typically we might associate quality with sort of, I don't know if you can see, but just if you scroll in, there's a tiny little part of the map in the big lump that says test after. And often typically we'll associate quality with that. You know, that's where we'll do our big behavioral type testing. We might do our SIT, we might have phase testing in there. And so we tend to associate quality with that because that is predominantly sort of the majority of thinking about quality happens at that point. But this map suggests something alternative, and it's suggesting that really quality is made up of a multiple different parts, and that rather than thinking about sort of testing as the only thing, it's like we need to think about all the different elements and think about how they impact quality, because they absolutely do. So for an example here, you know, I talked a bit at the start about sort of requirements and how challenging requirements can be because they don't stay up to date. Somebody, God forbid, goes and changes their mind about something or how it's going to behave. We get some feedback, but not necessarily everyone gets that feedback. Maybe it's the core people in the team who have a conversation, and for some reason, whatever, everyone's busy. They forget to communicate this out to other people who are not in the room. And the next thing we know is that some people are not up to date with what's going on. And, you know, surprise, surprise, the documentation hasn't been updated. And so we're in this situation where the communication hasn't been fantastic. And we have the situation where now the test engineers are testing the wrong version or the wrong thing. And this is unfortunately not uncommon. It's highly expensive. And you can see how poor communication potentially has an impact on quality. Another way is that if you look at the team and the team makeup, if you've got a test engineer who's in the team and potentially they don't necessarily feel that they can speak up about defects, maybe there's a difficulty there and they don't feel comfortable, or they don't have the psychological safety to be able to be talking about potential defects that maybe people are going to get upset about. You know, and that is going to have a huge impact on whether bugs get raised or not. So just even those two examples is kind of, I hope you get the idea that, you know, quality is something that is impacted by a lot of different things. Now, that's kind of good, right? Because instead of relying heavily on test after, which happens after product production, we can instead say, okay, well, let's actually break this down into smaller pieces and let's start chipping away at all these things, because we know that if we work on all these small pieces, that we are going to, that good quality will emerge from what we do. So if we have good practices, we have good ways of managing communication, if we do all the things that we know are the good things to do, if we have the hygiene, the code hygiene that we need to have, and we create stories that are small stories with small slices of business value. All these things will help us deliver quality in a way that allows quality to emerge. All right, let me just show you what I mean rather than, so this is kind of a breakdown of that lovely, beautiful map, this is my map, which is not quite so pretty, but it kind of wants to say the same thing. And it's saying, well, look, if we've got to consider all these different elements when we think about quality. And if we think, obviously we need to think about the product itself. We need to think about what are we building, who are our customers, what is the context in which we're building. Are we building a platform, or are we building a pacemaker? Like, these are what we build matters, and so will have a huge influence in how we think about quality and what we think is important. But in today's platforms, and in many of our software, when many of us work in similar type of platform systems, infrastructure is massively important. If we don't have the infrastructure that we need in order to be able to deploy rapidly, that's a problem. That's a problem. And if we can't deploy rapidly, we tend to go towards big batches. When we go to big batches, we know that the risk increases and the threats to quality increase, right? And so the impact, the radius of something going wrong is far, far broader than it is when we're delivering small batches of value. So infrastructure has a huge part to play in how we think about and how we achieve quality. Our processes, if our processes, if we're not doing small slices, if we have huge amounts of waste in our process, this is problematic because we're focused more on the process than we are on delivering quality products. And this is actually quite a problem in the testing space, where a lot of times testing is really hard to see. And so a lot of times people will kind of point to the process as that is testing, but testing is not a process. Testing is an activity. Just like software development is an activity. And so it's a doing thing. And so the focus really, when we look at testing, is to be doing testing, not writing about the testing that we've done. Now, you've got to balance it, of course. And, there's a difference between working with a scale up and an enterprise. And, the scale of trying to do things sometimes means you need to have a really well-oiled process that allows you to have infinite number of Jira tickets in order to achieve an outcome. I get it. I'm working at enterprise right now, but I think you always must question like the value that the process is giving you, and have we kind of over-indexed on process rather than thinking about sort of, are we delivering good testing? And then obviously, I hope it goes without saying that for people, people's skills, people's ability to know how to do a good test, know what testing is, and that everybody on the team is comfortable to do testing. That's going to have a huge impact on sort of who does the testing, and shifting away from that concept that, oh, the tester is the gatekeeper of quality. No, we all own it. So we all should be doing testing, right? This is not something that's sort of defined for one person. And yes, sure, maybe one person on the team is more qualified and more skilled than anyone else. That's fine. We've got, that's okay. But everyone, is prepared to jump in when needs be in order to test so that we avoid bottlenecks, that sort of thing. And finally, we've got outcomes. So we know exactly what we're going to, like, what are we trying to achieve? And I think I put this there because so often we focus on sort of like getting something done. And it's like, okay, I've built it, I've delivered it, I've tested it, it's like shipped. Now I can wipe my hands of it. And like, let's focus on the outcome, which is delivering the value. Where are we with that? Are we supporting value? Are we continuing to think about the value, even though we've deployed? Now, why am I harping around this for so long? Why didn't people think about this previously? I mean, what has changed to make us start thinking differently about quality to maybe, 10 years ago or even 20 years ago? And I put it down to this, well, not this totally, but I use this to explain a little bit about what has changed. The way I see it is, sorry, I should explain this graph first. So this is the cost of change model. In the purple, you will see a line that's sort of exponential. And this is sort of the waterfall cost of change model that was created in the 70s, I think. And basically what it was trying to convey was that, if that the cost of changing something after you deploy it is way, way, way more expensive than if you fix it on your local machine. And then this, of course, made sense. Like they were shipping on, I think it wasn't even CDs then, right? And so once the software was out of their hands and into the hands of the customer, there was no way of coming back and going to fix it. And so often it would be maybe a couple of years before they could actually fix a defect. And so it made a lot of sense that we had to make sure we got this right up front, right? And then Agile came along, which is the green line, and introduced that concept of fast feedback. And that really was a game changer for us, right? And so we were able to kind of go, you know what? If we deliver small incremental bits of value, we can actually lower the risk of failure. And that allows us to flatten the curve. And so the impact of failure isn't as large as it used to be. But I actually think things have changed too. Again, and I put it in red because it's nice and bright. But I think certainly the cost of change, since we've looked at platforms, the cost of change has changed again. And I think it's because, of course, our ability to recover from problems is way, way faster than it has ever been. And so cloud computing and platforms has enabled us to actually find defects even before the customer knows that it exists. Like that's nirvana, right? And so we invest a lot in monitoring and alerting to help us to do that. That reduces the risk as well. And so really what's starting to happen is that the expense of it, the cost where it becomes really expensive is actually, the cost of change is actually in SIT. And in these kind of, in our testing phases, if you've got large, heavy systems integration testing phases, this is costing a lot of money. And it's not just money, but also in terms of risk. So if you think about PII data, you think about security, you think about obviously privacy, all these things become really critical because we know that testing is a target because it's rich. It's not, maybe the credentials aren't as secure as they should be, and they don't necessarily reflect production 100%. And so I think this is rapidly changing, but you know, you've got these real risks in testing now that didn't exist. And so my hypothesis, and it is just a hypothesis, I'm not suggesting that this is absolute, it's just a theory, that really we like recoverability because it reduces our risk. And we need to start thinking about sort of the cost of change in testing and how we can reduce that. All right, so this all brings up some new quality attributes. By the way, if you're wondering what the thing is about with all the cars, there's absolutely zero. There's actually nothing behind it at all. You could almost call it legacy. These are from slides from a different topic, and I just liked all the cars, so I kept the car theme. But there's absolutely nothing to do with cars and what I'm talking about today. So just in case anyone's wondering about that. So it does bring about a whole new set of new quality attributes, and the state of DevOps talks about throughput, availability, and stability as being the key metrics to be looking at. And so I would sort of challenge, I want to put it out there that these are kind of new quality attributes for us, and we need to be thinking about these alongside our traditional quality attributes. We need to be thinking about testability. And what do I mean by testability? I mean sort of how difficult or easy something is to test, right? And we don't want to get into like right before we release and discover we couldn't test it because we have poor testability. We find it hard to test. It needs something additional that we can't, you know, we've got an external API that we don't have access to, and we hadn't thought about it, we didn't realize it, and now we can't test it until we put it out into production, and hopefully it will connect and work, right? So what we want to do is we want to actually think about testability as early as possible so we can build it into our systems. So we make it easier for everyone to test, and that we don't get into these situations where we're kind of hoping and keeping our fingers crossed that it's going to work because we're finding it really hard to test. And of course, recoverability and observability are key quality attributes for us today. And when I talk about sort of quality professionals, I really encourage them to be having these conversations about recoverability and observability as early as possible, so people are building these sorts of things in. So what I mean by observability is that ability to see inside a system, and to be able to kind of know, and this is really useful for things like root cause analysis and stuff like that, to be able to easily see inside the system and what it's doing. So what might all this bring it all down? And I'm kind of coming to the end now, coming to the pointy end of the talk, but bringing it down, like what might the activities look like? You know, I talked about small vertical slices, right? So we small vertical slices of customer value. And the closer I do that because we get fast feedback. You know, if we're doing small vertical slices, we're getting that fast feedback about what's happening from pixel to persistence. And so we're able to kind of quickly get that feedback. When we slice in other ways, it can be much, much harder to do that. That doesn't mean we don't slice horizontally at all. But certainly we need to be thinking about isolating and decoupling in a way that makes it easier to get that fast feedback as early as possible. Having shared understanding of stuff, so often we assume we understand, we think we understand, and we make mistakes because we haven't fully understood what those words meant. And so making sure we all are on the same page with language is fundamental. Having a team ownership of testing, like I said, the multiple fast feedback loops, as many as you can get, and they can be human, they can be automated, lots of different varieties of feedback. And one feedback that I had a team doing was, you know, how comfortable do you feel about this release we're going to do, you know? And it was a very kind of thumbs up, we feel confident, or actually we don't feel confident about this. And so there's lots of different types of feedback, and it's up for the team to explore ways that they can find those fast feedback loops and introduce them as much as possible into their system. I like to encourage diversity in any testing strategy. And when I mean diversity, I mean, you know, it's not just about test automation, but having that exploratory testing approach where people are looking for automation is for the known knowns, but certainly having a place and a system where people can learn about and understand complexity of the system. And it's sort of hard these days to figure out where to put that. I've explored some different approaches, but it's very much down to how the team operates as well. But having that ability to question and understand and realize that test automation is not going to cover all the things is certainly a hugely valuable part of any testing strategy. You know, being able to have feature flags. I said throughput is a new quality attribute. You know, sometimes we don't have time to do testing that we want to do. And so feature flags can be a useful way to kind of mitigate that risk, allow us to do a bit more testing in production. Clearly, canary release is reducing the size of what you release and, you know, gradually increasing to your customer base. So if there's a failure, you mitigate that failure. And almost this should be number one, an approach to continuous experimentation and continuous learning, right? Because nothing stays the same in software engineering, nothing remains fixed, and software testing and quality doesn't remain fixed. And quality morphs and changes all the time. And so we have to be there. We have to be continuously experimenting and being open to new ideas, open to different ways of working, open to doing things that maybe we're not totally comfortable with all the time. And that, I think, is part of the software engineering journey. I think everyone feels the same on that one. So the feedback loops that you could think about, obviously monitoring, alerting. Don't forget poor old customer feedback. I think one of the things I did at an organization was bring everyone who had quality into the conversation, and just had those connections, even if it was just an opportunity for people to connect and talk, to try and encourage that feedback loop back into discovery, back into delivery, because there's so much value in listening to our customers and understanding the concerns that they have. And sometimes I feel it sort of doesn't fit neatly into the automate all the things, but it's just a gold mine of historic information. And when we have information, we learn, and when we understand better, we can make informed decisions about what we're going to do. SLOs, service level objectives, product analytics, distributed tracing. I'm a huge fan of distributed tracing, and having that in your system to help observability. And of course, don't forget software testing. I'm not saying don't do software testing, but I think you can sort of, we now have different levels of safety nets that we can use, and let's kind of balance our safety nets and make sure that we're doing an appropriate amount of testing. But we also have recoverability as well to keep in mind. So it's making good decisions about what is a good test for us. Where is the good test cases that need to be placed? Where is automation absolutely critical? Where would exploratory testing be really, really useful? So if anything I could say to you is maybe have a go with some of this stuff. A social contract on quality, I think, would be a kind of useful exercise for any organization to do. I'm running that workshop in Dublin. I think it's on the 27th at Workday. But expand that conversation across product engineering and support. And even if we do have different ideas of what is quality, isn't that a worthwhile discussion having? Saying, hey, look, we have different opinions. Like, how are we going to make this work? Thinking about sort of customer value in both product and engineering, what do we mean by quality? What do we mean by success? What do we mean by these words that we use? How do we know that this is a good thing? And how important is it? How do we prioritize all this stuff? And in that way, we can all take responsibility for improving quality, because like I said, it's an ecosystem and we all play a part in that. And that, my friends, is it. Thank you very, very much for listening to me. I didn't get a chance to see any questions. I am here to answer any questions you might have. And like I said to Andrea, I do have many an opinion. Some of them are probably wrong, but I am happy to take any questions. This is a 40% discount on the Kindle version, which is on Lean Pub. If you're interested in taking that discount, it's available to people at this meetup. So if you're interested in all the things I've talked about, feel free to go and avail of that. Thank you.
Awesome. That was really, really interesting, Anne-Marie. It's I really loved I think one of the first things that really stayed with me was this definition of quality and how it's highly contextual depending on kind of what step of your journey as an organization you're in. And I think that was a really good way to crystallize that. I wonder if anyone has any questions that they want to voice. I have some questions that are written down in the draw board, but it would be awesome to hear from the attendees if there's anyone with questions.
Yeah, feel free to put the questions in the chat. I can always answer them there if you prefer to write them.
Yeah. Well, while people maybe think about it, Safety. Oh yeah. I think so. There was one question I have when you were talking about activities, and I wondered about maybe, sometimes you talk about uh, sharing knowledge and sharing understanding. Uh, can you give us some examples of how do you do that yourself? Like, is it just a chat? Do you try to formalize it a bit more? Do you find that is extremely contextual? Basically, how do you coach people? So, because if you're doing it, you have your own processes. But if you're a coach, you're trying to teach people how to do it. So that means you need to kind of give them a little bit more stepwise on how to share knowledge, for example, was one that I care about, but it could be any of these activities.
Yeah, look, I think there's many different levels to that. And it depends who you're trying to influence a bit. In coaching, like if you're going for the senior stakeholders in an organization, if you're trying to drive organizational change, what you're going to ship, like I guess you approach it in a slightly different way. When I'm working with teams, it really there's an also I don't want to say this, but isn't it depends answer, because I think that there's many different teams are in different circumstances. They're in different situations, right? Teams can be under a huge amount of pressure to deliver software, and I think it's on a anyone who's in the quality pressure, the working as a coach, or anyone working as a coach, to be cognizant of all the different things that a team is working on. I'm a big believer of sharing information, just links, blogs, things like that. I do a lot of internal speaking within an organization. I find sometimes people occasionally listen to that sort of stuff. That works for some people. But other people like writing sort of, formal documentation. People tend sometimes absorb information that way better. So I try and kind of have a different ways of targeting different groups, and being aware that just because I put stuff out doesn't necessarily mean that it's not being heard. It's just that people don't necessarily have time at this point in time to hear, and that I will just constantly kind of push out information. It can be quite exhausting, to be honest, sometimes to work like that, but it's been the most effective way. And just to remind yourself that, people are, as I said, people are busy and they don't necessarily have the time, but they will come back to it if they feel it's going to help and offer them value. So at other levels, it's just kind of thinking about questioning. One of the things that, whether you like it or not, but I've seen quality professionals do really well, is just ask the basic questions, in a meeting. What do you mean by that? And the reason why that's so valuable is often people don't know, and maybe they don't feel totally safe to okay, what do you mean by that acronym? What do you mean by that? And so I think sometimes the value of having, and it doesn't have to be a quality professional, actually, it could be architects, it can be lots of different people, but people who sort of have that sort of questioning, who are sometimes a little bit outside of the work, so there's a little bit of distance there to help kind of that distance helps sometimes to help see things from a different perspective. And so I think doing those sorts of things can be useful, but you've got to keep it balanced. The last thing you want to do is that person going every meeting so what do you mean by that? So like in all the things, it's nuanced.
Makes sense. I also was wondering about how do you, and also, opening the question to the floor, do you find, you talked about quality a lot, like a definition of quality, and we talked very little about how difficult it can be to test. So I would love to hear some of your experiences of, no, I mean, not just you, but like of everyone. It's like, why is it that testing is so hard? Because you can be concerned with quality and have some sort of mindset about quality, but at some point you need to actually test, either by manually testing, automatic testing. It doesn't matter where you land on the pyramid, but what is it about it that makes it hard today for you?
So it's a great question. I think like one of it is it is there's a never ending amount of tests you can run, honestly. Like, if you actually looked at it, if you wanted to test all the known knowns, but also the known unknowns, like, you're starting to kind of like, so you've got the positive tests and then you've got the negative tests. And suddenly, very, very quickly, you can see testing with the combinations and permutations. If you think about scenarios and different systems, and suddenly you're connecting 2 or 3 systems together, and now suddenly those combinations and permutations have escalate. Like, it becomes like a large number of tests that you run if you're trying to do exhaustive testing. It's a big exercise. It's like trying to test that black hole. Like, honestly, it's and I think then you'll put on top of it, well, okay, well, let's think about the performance of it. Let's think about the scalability. Let's think about the usability, accessibility, all those different things that we typically think about for a product. You then start sort of thinking, this is a lot of work. And typically we I think we don't necessarily have a handle on that. And I think it's a shame. This is one of the reasons why I'm such a big advocate of having whole team testing or having a quality coach, is because often that conversation, it's only the test engineers who are having those sorts of conversations, and the whole team doesn't get the opportunity to see that complexity. And so they're thinking, okay, well, testing's just, I'm going to do my BDD and my, and then I'll be done. But it's a lot more deeper than that, right? So I think like that in itself is a problem. And then put on top of that, now start talking about test environments, test data, and we haven't even started talking about change yet, and the fact that our products are continuously changing, and therefore our test automation needs to continuously change as well. And so I think sometimes we just underestimate how much effort it is, and we don't because it's not necessarily like adding it's not a perceived value add. It's often seen as a cost. There's a reluctance to invest in it because it will slow you down. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of decisions that need to be made that aren't necessarily made. They're just kind of assumed. And unfortunately, we pay the price. Everyone pays the price for it when we make decisions like that, because we end up with having to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to fix it.
Yeah, actually, I was just thinking about that. The whole, it's a sunk cost or some sort of cost and annoying thing to do until that time when it saves your cheese, or you realize that you could have written that test before. One of the main problems I struggled with in many orgs, like you go through multiple orgs and you have the same pattern everywhere, which is like, there is a great variance on quality of testing between different companies and different teams. But the common pattern is how low an effort we put in the quality of basically having the same kind of quality bars for the tests as we have for the code, where if you have a bug in your test, that's a much bigger problem in a lot of ways than because you're less likely to go to try to find it. To the point that many times you see people just commenting out codes, commenting out tests, and going, some problem. It's the environment's problem or infrastructure problem, and then it actually turns out that it was really an extremely good signal for something going wrong.
Yeah,
and that sounds. I think it adds to what you were saying on the. We just kind of see it as a massive cost, so we don't pay as much attention as we should. Listen.
Look, you hit it on the nail. Like, you hit one of the nails on the head, should I say? Like, I think I've fallen into this myself, and I don't hold myself different to anyone, because sometimes you just go, oh, it'll be all right, it'll be fine. And you just want it to be good. You want it not to be a problem, and so you kind of almost get to the point where you're like, it'll work. It should be fine. She'll be great. Yeah, she'll be grand. Um, and I think that's, I think humans just want that. Like, we want it to be, and unfortunately, testing and software encoding codes doesn't work that way. It doesn't just fill the gaps in nicely for us. It stops working. And so we have to, that's why I think so some of these social contracts around what we hold our team to and what we agree not to walk past are really important, because the team is holding that. It's not down to an individual who's kind of making that decision. We all own that, and we all keep each other accountable to that.
I really like that as a social contract. I had not seen that before. It kind of, sometimes it's implicit. It's like, oh, you shouldn't do that, but sometimes it's a bit wink, wink. We'll forget about it this time. So it's nice to see it slightly more explicit. This is our rules of engagement. Right. I kind of feel like we've just been having a chat, and then everyone has to listen to us. But I wonder,
does anyone? I'd love to. Yeah. Does anyone else have a different opinion? Because there are many out there, and I'm not necessarily got your context, and what I'm saying might not work for you. So if you've got a question or you want to have a alternative perspective, I'd love to hear it.
maybe everyone just agrees with you.
Maybe I'm just too compelling. I think that just comment there that quality is that poor quality is a default state. I think that's, kind of, somebody said it today. One of the chat messages was, it works on my machine is like the lowest bar you could have for quality, right? And so if that's your bar, then it's pretty low. And that we can do better. We can all do better than that.
I tend to agree. Yes, absolutely.
I can pitch in some, maybe.
Sure, please. Yeah.
Yeah. What I often see missing, since it's a virtual DDD meetup as well, is a lot of teams don't know the actual purpose of why they're writing software. So it becomes very hard to understand how much quality should I build in. Is this a core or supporting thing? So in my training, I said before, right, we have like an allocation bounded context, let's say. And the allocation bounded context is there to fill up the whole cinema. Now, if you think it's core, you're going to spend a lot of time testing quality. But if it's a supporting one, you might do less. And the only way to actually figure it out is to have an alignment with your business to understand, okay, how core or supporting to our business is this? And based on that, you want to change but the important part is, what's the purpose actually of this software model? And I think a lot of teams, what I see, are missing that. They don't understand that they're only working in the solution space and never in the problem space. So quality becomes already set up to failure if you don't understand, why am I actually writing this software? I think that's also an important question. If we want to talk about what's the quality, well, first up, what's the purpose, and then we can talk a little bit about quality, which I find good. And usually comes by default when teams could take ownership. Usually.
I love that perspective. I really do. Has anyone got other similar experience?
I kind of wanted to add on the communication thing. You touched on comms quite a few times as a source of problems, and also as a sort of place from which you can find solutions, really. And I kind of think you also touched on language, which is another kind of core concept of DDD with the ubiquitous language. And it made me think also about how I've seen some teams trying to do like BDD specific on domain-driven type approaches. And I wonder if anyone had experience with those, of that kind of, oh, we're doing BDD with a DDD flavor. That sometimes I've seen it go kind of pretty useful, and some other times it just made this whole idea too complicated for its own good. And yeah, just wonder if someone tried that. Yep,
I've had some experiences with, sorry, did I cut
No,
someone
yeah.
off there? Yeah.
No,
I had
go
some
for it.
experience with BDD, not necessarily using domain-driven design techniques. I think it's, I'd actually describe it in the book. There was a team that was working and they wanted to experiment with BDD. And this company was absolutely amazing, by the way. They were using stream programming, test-driven development. All the engineers owned all the test automation, and we rarely had incidents. And it was a banking product, and it was one of the most enjoyable places to work with, because I go in and all the teams were talking about how do we test this, right? And I was like, I don't know why I'm here. This is awesome. But one of the teams wanted to try BDD. And so I wasn't a huge fan, because a lot of the software was that we were doing at the time was transactions. It wasn't actually, it didn't lend itself to behaviors in a way. It wasn't people centric. If you think about sort of banking transactions, it's a slightly different dynamic there. But certainly they wanted to give this a go, and so it was like, okay, well, let's try it out. And one of the challenges that they had was, of course, determining behaviors. Like, so the team was actually doing the whole BDD thing. So often, like, people jump straight to testing in BDD and they don't actually do that analysis of, sort of what do we actually really understand what we're building, and that sort of customer value and the whys and stuff. But they did all that. But at the end of the day, they decided that after 3 months, they didn't like it. It didn't work for them. And the only person on the team who really liked it was the tester. So I thought that was quite funny. But it's certainly difficult in a lot of places to get traction. And I sometimes think it's quite people tend to jump to like, oh, it's cucumber. So, and I think that's a real shame.
Yeah, it is a shame. I actually used it 12 years ago in a banking context in asset management, and I really worked with information management.
Fantastic. Yeah, nice. Yeah.
Using example mapping. I use example mapping a lot. I teach it as well a lot, as in your easiest step to DDD, right? People, when you do event forming or domain storytelling, they're like, oh, this is a lot. We need to understand a lot of it. While it's, I can imagine, right? The first setup to an event storming or a domain storytelling might seem hard, but an example mapping you can just quickly do in a refinement. Just the only thing you need, and this is Liak saying, right? The only thing you need to do start doing BDD is, can you give me a clear example? That's the first part. Give me a clear example, like a clear meaning proper names or proper, and I see a lot of teams very helpful doing that. But most of the times it comes from, I don't want to do this, I just want to code style, and that's a shame.
I had an experience of, there were some BDD tests, and I'm talking about like 10 for a microservice, like, or a few microservices maybe talking to each other. And should they be microservices or not? It's a discussion we won't have right now. But what happened is that people wanted to stop using it because the tests were extremely brittle. And even though you could kind of read the test, actually creating a test was extremely painful, because you had to do all this kind of artificial thing just so the test looked like natural language, and actually it wasn't. It was really convoluted. So I could really understand. Like, I was like, well, fair enough. I mean, yes, it is super complicated to do this. Maybe it's what gives you more value, and people started kind of migrating more to a lot of the tests were on the APIs, or basically trying to move away from the brittleness, but also it meant that your context on seeing the whole picture was really kind of all over the shop. You hadn't a way to see the system. To me, that points to like boundaries. But I mean, I can see how this arrived because of organic growth. So where do you get people to go from there, other than, oh, we need to redefine the boundaries so we can write better tests?
So BDD doesn't entail you need to use something like Cucumber. That's what people also usually confuse. So I use example mapping and then it goes straight to TDD from there. I rather skip Cucumber if I can, because this is what you're saying is it can become very brittle, and it's an abstraction over your code. So every abstraction.
By the way, we were not using Cucumber. Like we were just using we were using like we were in Scala land, so we were using test framework in Scala, like our normal test framework, but we were doing this with like trying to talk at a very high level of integration, and it was, I mean, it's bound to be brittle.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, that's context.
I think part of it's worth going back, I think, also to, you know, why do we do testing? Like, why are we testing? And, you know, the way I see it is we have a huge system. We think we've written some code, we think we know what it does, but until we test it, we don't know for sure. So software testing is the exercise of getting information on the state of the system, right? And I think if we look at it as an information provider, then it's like, well, is it giving us valuable information, or is it giving us minimal information, right? So I think sometimes we, you know, the types of tests that we're building can be, depending where they are in the life cycle, you know, are they providing the right value to you at this point of time? And there's obviously different layers of value that you want to know, and having customer value and understanding the problem, which was what you originally talked about, Kenny, is, you know, do we understand the why of what we're building? And until we understand the why, and do we understand how our systems behave, and do we understand our context? And if we don't understand our context, it's really hard for us to make changes without knowing and understanding what exactly we're trying to build. So I'm not sure if that's like completely taken this conversation off into a different planet, but it kind of occurred to me, it's like, well, why are we doing the test? What are we trying to achieve from it? And what sort of information do we want back? And I think if we know that, then making these decisions about what level of abstraction we're trying to test, or what exactly we're trying to test, can maybe those questions kind of emerge out of those, you know, if we ask those types of questions. I think I've just...
No, I think that's, but going on some, like, I think your question is a valid one, and it's like that thing of you have to introspect onto at what point you know you're doing something, and you have to do it for a reason. And so it seems like a logical conclusion to me.
Well, it's so expensive, right? Testing is so expensive. Like, why? That's the thing. That's the problem. Like, it's not a cheap exercise. I feel like that's why it's important.
Agreed. Cool. I like that we went on. Like, I think an essential part of our virtual DD meetings is that there's more of, you kind of go somewhere and it's not so structured Q&A, but you start kind of trying to find diversions that maybe find you in some kind of fun place. And sometimes it's really valuable, and some other times, you know, maybe not. But I think in this case, I'm pretty happy with that.
We didn't get on to cat shampoos.
We didn't get to cat shampoos, but we can. This is the time everyone was waiting for. Does anyone have questions about cat shampoo or other cat-related things? I mean, that would be good. So this is the time. But if anyone doesn't have questions about any of those things, perhaps we can, you know, just start saying goodbye and then stop streaming. And thank everyone for coming over today and joining us, especially Anne-Marie. Thank you for a really good presentation and for being here and entertaining us with a lot of stuff, but very little cat shampoo related things.
Next time I'll do a cat theme just for you.
Thank you. Oh, thanks. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time. Yeah. Anyway.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks a million for hosting me and inviting me. It's been really enjoyable. So thanks.
Awesome. Well,
right.
See you next time. Our next meeting, as I said, is for Virtual DDD is the 23rd of September. Go to virtualddd.com, join us online, and strong of all.